Ryan Anderson had always considered himself an ordinary man. He grew up in a small town, worked hard to get into a good college, and eventually landed a decent job at a corporate law firm. Claire, a renowned architect, was everything Ryan admired in a person: intelligent, driven, and ambitious. Together, they made a formidable team. They had 2 children, Olivia and Luke, both bright and full of promise, and a house that would make any homeowner proud. He had always trusted his wife, but there was something about the way she had been acting lately that made him uneasy. But something compelled him to check her emails. He had never needed to monitor her actions. They had always been completely transparent with each other. The subject line was innocuous enough: meeting details for tomorrow. But as Ryan read through the email, his stomach turned. The email detailed plans for a meeting the next day in a hotel room. The tone was professional, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something Ryan couldn't place. But as he scrolled through the messages, his heart sank. Blake had written, "The prenup 1T matter if we can prove he has been using company resources for his private investigations." He wasn't just losing his wife, he was losing his children, his career, and his reputation. But instead of panicking, Ryan did what he did best. He compartmentalized the pain and focused on the task at hand, but was now the person responsible for the destruction of everything he held dear. With the evidence he had gathered, he began preparing his counterattack. This wasn't just about saving his marriage, it was about saving everything he had worked for. We'll use his own work against him, and with your mother's connections in family court, we'll ensure you get everything, including full custody of the children. Ryan's blood ran cold as he read those words. Claire, the woman he had trusted above all others, was not just going to leave him, she was going to take everything he had and ruin him in the process. The first few emails seemed harmless, work-related, family updates, even a few friendly exchanges. But then his eyes fell upon one message that stopped him cold. The Claire he had known, the woman he had married, the woman he had built a life with, seemed so far removed from the one he was reading about in these emails. He tapped into his network of contacts, made discreet inquiries, and soon uncovered a wealth of information. Claire had been using her position in the family business to siphon money into secret accounts. She had been planning this betrayal for months, if not years. But what really hurt was the discovery of how she had been manipulating their children. Had his entire life been a lie? Was this some twisted game Claire had been playing all along? Her late nights at the office, the increased frequency of business trips, and the distant look in her eyes when they would talk about their future, all these signs began to weigh on him. Another one followed, this time an exchange between Claire and this man, whose name was Blake Turner. It was clear from the tone of the conversation that their relationship was more than just professional. Blake referred to Claire as his muse and mentioned how much he admired her creative vision, which to Ryan seemed far too personal. He brushed them off, convincing himself that it was just the pressures of work. But that day, when Claire left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went out to run errands, Ryan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something he needed to see. As Ryan scrolled further, he found a shocking revelation. Claire and Blake had been planning to leave him. They were preparing to split up everything they had built together, everything Ryan had sacrificed for. But it wasn't just the divorce they were plotting. No, this was far worse. They were planning to destroy him. It was a modern, sleek mansion in the heart of the city, with walls of glass that looked out over a sprawling garden. Ryan and Claire had worked hard to make it their dream home, and to Ryan, it represented everything they had achieved together. His life had always followed a predictable trajectory, stable, calm, and secure. He married Claire, a woman he believed was his perfect match, a woman who shared his dreams and aspiration, and they soon became the envy of everyone they knew. Their marriage was a picture of success, a partnership that seemed invincible to the outside world. For the first few years, everything seemed perfect. They lived the life many people dreamed of: luxurious vacations, fancy dinners, and weekends filled with family activities. Ryan had a stable career, Claire was at the top of her field, and their children thrived in private schools. Life was everything they had imagined it to be, or so Ryan thought. However, everything started to change one day when Ryan came across a hidden file on Claire's laptop. He opened the laptop hesitantly, knowing that snooping around wasn't something he usually did. The message was from a name he didn't recognize, an unfamiliar man who had been emailing Claire regularly. His thoughts raced, but he couldn't make sense of what was happening. His heart began to race as he read on. The email wasn't the only piece of evidence. Ryan sat in stunned silence. But that wasn't the worst part. One email caught his eye in particular. His background in security and corporate espionage made him the perfect person to investigate Claire's hidden life. His mind raced as the full weight of the betrayal hit him. He spent the next few weeks gathering evidence. Ryan knew he had to act fast. He had to protect his children from the woman who had once been the love of his life. The days after Ryan discovered Claire's betrayal were a blur, a constant tug-of-war between rage and cold, calculating logic. Ryan had always been a man who prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize. What had once seemed like a stable, thriving family was now a house of cards, each one carefully arranged but ready to fall. The woman he had loved and trusted had not only betrayed him emotionally, but she was actively working to destroy him, his business, his reputation, his future. Was Claire really the woman he had married, or had he been living with a stranger this entire time? His mind was consumed by questions, but one thing became crystal clear. He had to be the one to take control. It was the subtle signs in Claire's behavior. She had become distant, almost cold at times, and had been more secretive than ever. The space that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a cage. He walked over to the dresser, his hands cold and trembling as he reached for the ring Claire had given him on their wedding day. The diamond sparkled, but it seemed hollow now, a reminder of a love that had been sold out for power and greed. The way she hid her phone, the late nights at the office, the unexplained trips, all of it was adding up. The Moretti family, whose lives had been destroyed in the accident, had never received justice. A figure in a tailored suit walked in. Lawrence Kemper, Diana's lawyer. He was everything Ryan expected, cold, smug, and dripping with arrogance. Without a word, Lawrence slid the divorce papers across Ryan's desk. "She gets everything, including full custody," he said, his voice full of disdain. "Your children don't even want your name anymore." But Ryan knew that this was his chance to bring everything to light. He didn't flinch when he handed it over to Lawrence. "Deliver this to your client," Ryan said, his voice low and calm. The lawyer hesitated for a moment before taking the envelope. The words hanging in the air were clear. Ryan wasn't done yet. He had the ammunition he needed to destroy Claire's family, but he needed to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could backfire. The first call was from Claire, her voice frantic and panicked as she demanded to know what was happening. The second call was from Blake, full of rage and fury. Ryan didn't answer either. The third call, however, was from Patricia Harrison. Her voice, usually cold and commanding, was now filled with fear. Ryan could hear it in her tone, the fear of being exposed. The years they had spent building a life together, the home they had bought with their own hands, the business they had created, everything had been a lie. But Ryan wasn't intimidated by Patricia's status. In fact, he knew the power of information better than anyone. If he could find leverage against Patricia, he could force her to turn on her own daughter. He started digging through old court records, looking for anything that could be used against the Harrison family. It wasn't long before Ryan found what he was looking for, but he couldn't dwell on the past. He had to focus on the future. It involved a drunk driving accident that had claimed the lives of 3 people, including a family of immigrants who owned a small construction company. The driver responsible was the son of a wealthy businessman who had been connected to Patricia's re-election campaign. The case had been mishandled, and the driver had received a lenient sentence. Thanks to the influence of the Harrison family, Ryan knew that Claire's family held the key to everything. If he could find a way to expose the Harrison family's dirty secrets, he could destroy Claire and Blake's plan. Ryan wasn't blind to her shifts in behavior, but he hadn't been prepared for the full extent of what was happening. His wife was slipping away from him, and the more he saw, the more he realized how deeply her betrayal ran. If Claire and Blake thought they could destroy him, they had underestimated the man they were dealing with, and she wasn't doing it alone. He had worked his whole life to build his career as a security consultant, carefully cultivating a reputation for being calm under pressure, for seeing things other people missed. He had built a life with Claire, his beautiful, intelligent wife and their 2 children. He had invested everything into that life, but the revelation of her affair with Blake Turner, her business partner, shattered that life. Blake Turner, the man Claire had been having an affair with, was not just her partner in business. He was a well-connected, smooth-talking operator, someone who knew how to use his charm and connections to get what he wanted. He was dangerous, and Claire had not only fallen for him, but had involved him in a plan to take everything from Ryan. The more Ryan uncovered, the clearer it became that Blake was a master manipulator, using his position in Claire's life to gain leverage over him. Ryan couldn't help but wonder, how long had this been going on? The first thing Ryan did was gather evidence. He had always been methodical in his work, and now he used those same skills to document everything Claire had done. He started by tracing financial transactions, going over bank statements, and reviewing email correspondence. The emails between Claire and Blake were damning. They weren't just planning to divorce him, they were planning to take everything he had, to strip him of his children, his business, and his dignity. But it wasn't just the financial records that told the story. One night, after putting the kids to bed, Ryan found himself alone in their master bedroom. As he held the ring, Ryan reflected on everything that had led him to this moment. Ryan's investigation into Claire's family began with Patricia Harrison, her mother, who was a federal judge with a long and distinguished career. Hidden deep within the court archives was a case from years ago, one that had been sealed and forgotten. The Harrison family had used their power and influence to bury the truth. The more Ryan dug, the more he uncovered. The following day, as Ryan sat in his office, the door opened. Ryan looked up, his expression blank. His hands were steady as he reached for the envelope in his drawer. He had carefully planned every move, and now it was time to put his plan into action. As soon as the lawyer left, Ryan's phone lit up. It was time for Ryan to take control. For the next few days, Ryan moved through life like a man in a fog. The weight of Claire's betrayal hung over him, but he kept his emotions locked tight. Ryan's background in security consulting gave him a unique set of skills. He was used to collecting data, analyzing patterns, and looking for vulnerabilities. Now, those same skills would be used against his own wife. Every file on Claire's laptop, every conversation with Blake, every hidden financial transaction, it was all part of the puzzle he needed to solve. Ryan knew he couldn't just react in anger. He had to be strategic. Every move had to be calculated. So he started with the basics. He backed up all of his personal files and business documents. He was going to need them as leverage later. Then he began looking into Claire's family, specifically her mother, Patricia Harrison. If there was anyone who could help him take down Claire's empire, it was Patricia. He reached into his drawer, pulled out the sealed envelope, and slid it across the table toward Kemper. "Deliver this to your client," Ryan said, his voice steady and calm. But the deeper Ryan dug into the Harrison family, the darker things became. Ryan didn't wait for him to say anything else. He knew that whatever came next, he was ready. "What the hell is this, Ryan? What are you trying to do?" But Ryan didn't answer. He deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. He had spent months preparing for this moment, and now it was time to make his move. Blake screamed, but again, Ryan didn't listen. He didn't need to. He had already won. He wasn't going to leave anything to chance. "I was wondering when you'd call." He had the evidence, and he was ready to use it. The judge had been involved in a controversial case over a decade ago, one that had been buried under the weight of money and influence. "You can't prove anything," she said, but Ryan knew better. He had everything. "I can prove everything," Ryan replied. "Bank records, campaign donations, secret meetings with Gregory Harrison, all of it. I have it all." He had the truth on his side, and he was determined to use it to his advantage. Diana would withdraw the divorce papers. Blake would sell his share of the business, and Ryan would get full custody of the children. If they didn't agree, Ryan would expose everything, and Claire and her family would be destroyed. Ryan could hear the fear in her voice as she demanded to know how he had found out about her family's dirty secrets. "How could you know about a 13-year-old secret?" she screamed. It was a case that involved the death of an innocent family in a drunk driving accident. He didn't even look up from his desk when Kemper slid the papers across the table. He had proof of the affair, proof of the conspiracy to destroy him, and proof of the corruption within Claire's family. He wasn't just going to fight for custody of his children. He was going to bring down everything Claire and her family had worked so hard to build. And the lenient sentence given to the driver, who happened to be the son of a wealthy businessman. Ryan didn't flinch. "She gets everything, including full custody," Kemper said smugly, his tone cold and dismissive. "Your children don't even want your name anymore." Patricia had been the judge who handed down that sentence, and Ryan was sure that if he could expose the truth, it would bring everything crashing down. He couldn't afford to break down, not yet. He had too much at stake. He couldn't let her, or Blake, or anyone else see him vulnerable. He was on a mission now, and he would do whatever it took to take control of the situation. He focused on the task at hand, finding the evidence that would bring Claire and Blake down. The discovery of the encrypted messages on Claire's laptop had been the turning point. Ryan had always known that his wife was a private person, but he never imagined she could hide something this huge. Ryan's blood ran cold when he read it. For the third time, his own wife, the woman he had trusted with everything, was conspiring with Blake to ruin his life. They had it all planned out. They would take the kids, take his business, and leave him with nothing. All he had worked for, all he had built, would be wiped away in one fell swoop. As he dug deeper, he found more and more incriminating evidence. But it was the discovery of Blake's involvement that really hit home. This was the woman he had loved for years, the mother of his children, and the person he thought he could trust above all others. They weren't just planning to divorce him, they were plotting to destroy him. The message that Blake had written about using company resources to set Ryan up for surveillance was chilling. Ryan's emotions were a tangled mess of anger, betrayal, and determination. But he was no stranger to adversity. He had faced difficult situations before: loss, failure, and personal setbacks, but this was personal. The pain was almost unbearable. But Ryan knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let her or Blake win. The next few weeks were a blur of planning and preparation. Patricia Harrison, a federal judge, had always been a powerful figure in Claire's life. But what Ryan uncovered shocked him. The more he investigated, the clearer it became that the Harrison family had built their fortune on corruption and deceit. But Ryan wasn't afraid. By the time the day came for the confrontation, Ryan had everything he needed. When Diana's lawyer, Lawrence Kemper, served him the divorce papers at his office, it felt like a formality. Ryan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Kemper's smug expression faltered for just a moment as he took the envelope. As Kemper left his office, Ryan's phone lit up with calls. The first was from Claire. Her voice was frantic, almost pleading. The second call came from Blake. His voice was full of fury and anger. "You think you can blackmail us? This is extortion." The third call came from Patricia Harrison. Ryan didn't flinch. "Good evening, Patricia," he said calmly. Patricia's voice trembled as she tried to deny everything. The conversation ended with Patricia agreeing to meet his demands. The week following his confrontation with Diana's lawyer was one of quiet determination for Troy. Every part of his plan was now set in motion, and he was no longer acting out of anger. No, his focus had shifted completely to the cold, methodical dismantling of everything Diana and Blake had worked to build. His world had already been shattered by betrayal, but he knew that nothing was more dangerous than underestimating his resolve. While Diana tried to present an air of calm, Troy knew she was breaking inside. She had received the email, seen the first hint of what was to come, but she had yet to realize how far he had gone. "You've got everything needed to completely destroy their case." The legal and financial wreckage he had set in motion was about to hit her, and her family like a storm. "I'm bringing down everything she's ever relied on. The business, the family, her reputation. If I have to burn it all down to get justice for my kids, I will. I don't just want her to win, Julian. I want her to feel every inch of this. I want her to understand what happens when someone betrays me, not just in court, but in every part of her life. Her family, her business, her reputation, all of it will crumble. Blake will go down with her." If there was anyone who understood the stakes of the battle ahead, it was Julian, a seasoned attorney who had once helped him through a messy merger dispute years ago. "The document you've been looking for, it's the smoking gun. Patricia's connection to the Moretti family's deaths. We've got it all. The case file, The payments, the cover-up, it's all there. He had what he needed. His leverage was solid. He wasn't just going to destroy Diana, he was going to burn everything to the ground. It wasn't just about winning the legal battle, it was about sending a message to everyone involved. Diana, Blake, and anyone who had tried to take him down would soon learn what it meant to face Troy Blackstone. He would fight for his family, his business, and his reputation, no matter what it took. When she realized what was coming for her, it would be too late. Julian knew that Troy wasn't talking about revenge in the typical sense. This was calculated. He wasn't just a man trying to save his marriage or his children. He was a man whose entire world had been turned upside down, and he had no choice but to fight back with everything he had. It wasn't about winning anymore, it was about survival. This was Troy taking everything back, piece by piece, and ensuring that those who had wronged him would pay the price. There's a lot at stake here, Troy. If you move forward with this, there will be no going back. The evidence had been presented to the board of Harrison Hoffman Development. They had no idea what hit them, and neither did Diana. Troy had made sure of that. He had dismantled her legal defense before she could even prepare for a fight. But you've been methodical. The evidence you've gathered is undeniable. You've got the leverage. Julian had also been the first person Troy called when he realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. Every text, every call, every hidden transaction, he had it all. It wasn't just the financial misdeeds that Troy was targeting. No, the betrayal ran deeper. It was the affair, the carefully orchestrated plans for him to lose everything, even his children. Blake had thought he could control the situation, that his charm and connections would keep everything in line. But Troy had one thing Blake could never have: patience. Diana had no idea how much trouble she was in. As he sat at his desk, he received a call from Julian, the one person who had the power to get him the one thing that could destroy Diana's entire family, Patricia Harrison's secret. Julian had managed to dig into Patricia's past further than Troy ever could, and now he was ready to provide the final piece of the puzzle. And Troy had been gathering the pieces for months, building a case so airtight that nothing could get in his way. Troy's next move was to meet with his own lawyer, someone who had been by his side through many of his corporate investigations. Sitting across from Julian in a conference room, Troy laid out everything he had gathered: bank records, encrypted texts, emails, photos, and even those damning screenshots of Blake and Diana plotting behind his back. Julian listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he processed the details. When Troy finally finished, Julian leaned back in his chair, his face serious. "You've got them, Troy," Julian said, his voice low and deliberate. "This is beyond what I expected." Troy nodded, his jaw clenched tightly. "I'm not just taking her to court, Julian." Julian rubbed his chin thoughtfully, the weight of the situation not lost on him. Troy's mind was already 2 steps ahead, as usual. The room was silent for a moment, the gravity of Troy's words sinking in. Troy left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. The first part of his plan had already begun to unfold. Troy walked back to his office that afternoon with a feeling of calm determination. "Listen, Troy, I've got what you need." Troy's pulse quickened. "Send it to me." "Already on its way." The moment he hung up the phone, Troy's heart rate slowed. As he prepared for the next steps, he didn't waste any time. Troy spent the next few days refining his plan, each step more calculated than the last. He had already started watching Diana's movements more carefully, but now he was also paying close attention to Blake's behavior. The business associates, who had helped him with the leverage over Blake's financial dealings, were now ready to act. His objective was clear. He wasn't just going to get a divorce. He wasn't going to let Diana and Blake get away with it. Troy had set up the meeting at one of the most exclusive private clubs in New York City, where only members had access. The atmosphere was calm, controlled, as it always was in places like this. She was dressed in a tailored black suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and her emerald eyes seemed to glow with anger. Troy couldn't help but notice how different Blake looked now. The arrogance that had once exuded from him was now replaced with an edge of uncertainty. Maybe, just maybe, he had started to realize that things were shifting in Troy's favor. She didn't speak to him, just took a seat across the table and folded her arms. She looked calm, almost too calm. Troy could see the cracks in her demeanor, though the way her hands trembled slightly. The tightness in her jaw. She was nervous, and she had every reason to be. He took a seat at the large round table, his hands folded in front of him. He wasn't going to show weakness, not now, not ever again. He was a tall man, well-dressed, and the kind of person who relied on intimidation rather than logic. He smiled as he sat down, but quickly stopped when Troy didn't offer the usual pleasantries. "You've been hiding a lot from me, Diana. But now, I'm returning the favor. I've got everything you've done. I'm talking about the fact that you and Blake have been planning this for months, and now it's all in that envelope. Every lie, every hidden transaction, every message you thought you deleted." This was the moment that everything he had worked for would come to fruition. The truth was right there in front of her, and she had nowhere to run. He knew Diana's lawyer would feel safe there, expecting a straightforward meeting. Little did they know that Troy was already 3 steps ahead, and everything was about to change. Troy was going to ensure they paid for their treachery. He wasn't just fighting for custody of his children, either. He was fighting for something more important, his children's future. The truth had come out, and there was no turning back now. "You thought you had everything figured out, but now I've got everything. Your family's dirty. Secrets, your affair with Blake, your manipulations, it's all out in the open. You wanted to take my life, my children, my business. But you didn't realize that I'm not the man you thought I was. We've come to finalize the details of the divorce. I trust you're ready to cooperate." Diana's empire was crumbling, and it was only a matter of time before everything she had worked so hard for would slip through her fingers. This was about setting the record straight, about destroying the lies that had been spun around him, and about making sure that the truth came out loud and clear. "I'm ready," Troy said, his voice calm but firm. "You may have thought you could destroy me, but I'm not the one losing here. You are." "What do you mean by that?" "But I don't think you are." He had compiled everything he needed: proof of Blake's financial misconduct, text messages, and photos of him with Diana. Troy had meticulously documented every detail, ensuring that no stone was left unturned. "I mean, I've got something you haven't seen yet." He reached into his bag and placed an envelope on the table, sliding it towards Diana. They had underestimated him, and it was clear that neither Diana nor Blake realized how thoroughly Troy had prepared for this moment. He had been methodical in his research and planning, and the pieces were falling into place. He had spent the last few days preparing, reading over the legal documents, and making sure every detail was in place. Troy had the upper hand now, and he knew it. The emotional toll of what had happened, the lies, the betrayal had hit him hard, but he refused to let it break him. He wasn't the victim here. No, he was in control now. In the days leading up to the final confrontation, Troy made sure that his allies were in place. Troy wasn't only planning to take back what was rightfully his. He was preparing for the ultimate retaliation. He hadn't seen Diana since the day the papers had been served. The day of the confrontation arrived. As Troy entered the dimly lit private room, he took a moment to look around. Diana arrived first. Blake entered next, looking as confident as ever, his hand firmly holding onto the back of Diana's chair. Diana's lawyer, Lawrence Kemper, walked in last. "Mr. Blackstone," Kemper said, his voice smooth but cold. Troy's gaze locked with Kemper's. Kemper furrowed his brows. Troy smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile. Diana looked down at the envelope, her eyes narrowing. "What's this?" Troy leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the table. "You're about to find out." Diana took the envelope and opened it. Her face changed immediately. The color drained from her cheeks, and for the first time, Troy saw something real in her eyes: fear. "You can't be serious," she muttered under her breath. Troy sat still, watching her carefully. Diana's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the affair, the lies, the cover-up." Troy stood up slowly, his voice steady and unwavering. The silence in the room was deafening. Blake's expression faltered, and Kemper's confident smirk quickly faded. Diana didn't say anything. She just stared at the papers in her hand, her fingers trembling as she read the documents Troy had carefully prepared. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice shaky. "This will ruin me." "Diana," Troy said, his voice cutting through the silence, "this is just the beginning." Diana stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. Troy didn't flinch. "You already ruined yourself, Diana. This is just the fallout." He turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to face her one last time. Troy stepped out of the room, his heart racing, but his mind clear. He had done it. As he walked down the hallway, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't fighting to win anymore. He wasn't fighting for revenge. Troy's phone buzzed on the passenger seat of his car as he drove down the rainy streets, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet vehicle. He had just walked out of the lawyer's office, leaving behind a room full of defeated faces, and yet his mind was racing with the events that had just transpired. He hadn't felt the weight of victory just yet. It was a private number, the kind that usually spelled trouble. He knew it was Blake's lawyer before the words had even been spoken. With a deep sigh, he answered. He wasn't going to let Blake's lawyer rattle him. Not now, not ever again. Diana had a lawyer working tirelessly to salvage whatever dignity she had left, trying to make it look like she was still in control. But it was too late. Troy had already taken the upper hand. "I see," he said, his tone betraying a hint of frustration. "You're making a mistake, Blackstone. You can't afford to burn all your bridges. There's still room for compromise." All he could think about was the crushing betrayal and the lengths Diana and Blake had gone to destroy him. "Tell Diana, if she wants to see this matter resolved, she can come to me. There's nothing left for me to gain from her and Blake. They've already lost. You've been sent an offer to resolve this matter amicably. We believe it would be in your best interest to reconsider and accept the terms." It wasn't the confident, cold tone she had used in the past. This was desperation. "There's nothing left to talk about, Diana. You've made your choice. You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice low but unwavering. "There's no more room for compromise. I'm done making deals with people who don't have the decency to respect me. I'm done with all of it. You've been planning to take everything from me, Diana." Troy could hear Diana's shallow breathing, and for a moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the memories of everything she had done flooded back: her affair with Blake, her betrayal, her attempts to destroy him, and he hardened once more. This was it. The battle was won. But the war was far from over. Diana had lost everything. Her wealth, her family, her reputation. It was all slipping away from her, just as it should. Troy wasn't going to stop until she paid for what she had done. "My children, my business, my dignity. And now you want to talk about what's best for us. I thought I was doing what was best for all of us." He hadn't heard from Diana since the confrontation, but he knew the phone calls and messages would come soon. He could feel the weight of everything settling in his chest. The fight wasn't over yet. There were still battles to be won, and he was going to make sure Diana and Blake lost everything. "You made your choices, Diana, and now you'll live with the consequences." The storm was just beginning, but Troy wasn't afraid anymore. He had fought for everything he had, and now he was going to make sure that the people who had tried to destroy him would be the ones left standing in the ruins. She wouldn't let this go quietly. Diana never did anything quietly. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that came from being single or disconnected from the world. No, it was the kind of loneliness that came from betrayal. The kind of loneliness that came when you realized that the person you thought you loved had been planning to destroy you from the inside out. Not now, not ever again. He could feel it creeping in, but he refused to let it consume him. He had already lost too much, but he would not let it define him. He wasn't going to let her walk away with this victory. It felt like a lifetime ago when he had envisioned his future in that house, with Diana by his side and their children growing up in the home they had created together. Now, that future was a shattered dream. The children were with him, and they would never have to know the truth about the darkness in their mother's heart. But Troy had already made up his mind. No matter how much she had tried to erase him from her life, no matter how much she tried to burn down their past, Troy wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to make sure that she paid for what she had done. As he parked in the driveway of his new apartment, Troy couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for the house he had built, the one he had poured his soul into for the past decade. His phone buzzed again. This time, the number on the screen was unfamiliar. Troy Blackstone. The voice was familiar, but cold. "Yes," Troy replied, his voice calm and collected. "Blackstone. I'm calling in regards to the settlement that was offered to you." Troy's lips curled into a slight smile. He knew exactly where this conversation was heading. "I'm not interested in any settlement," Troy responded firmly. The lawyer on the other end fell silent for a moment. Troy leaned back in his seat, glancing out the window at the rain falling softly against the glass. The silence stretched on for a long time before the lawyer spoke again, this time with less conviction. "I'll relay your message," he said, before hanging up. Troy dropped his phone into the cup holder and sat back, staring out at the rain. That night, as Troy sat alone in his apartment, the loneliness settled in. The phone buzzed again, and this time, it was Diana's number flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "What was best for all of us?" "Troy, please, we need to talk." Diana's voice was shaky, almost pleading. Troy took a deep breath and leaned forward. "I didn't mean for things to get this far," she said, her voice breaking. Troy laughed bitterly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know what to say," Diana whispered, almost as if she was trying to find the right words to make it right again. "There's nothing left to say," Troy replied, his voice firm. He ended the call, feeling a sense of finality settle over him. As the rain continued to pour outside, Troy stood up and walked over to the window. Troy's breath was steady, his steps deliberate as he walked out of the conference room. The sounds of the office behind him faded into the background. Diana, Blake, and Kemper might have been left in the room, their mouths likely hanging open in disbelief, but Troy didn't look back. He knew what came next, and it was time to put the final pieces of his plan into action. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. It was about proving that no one, not even someone as privileged as Diana, could manipulate their way out of their consequences. He had spent too long playing second fiddle, too long pretending that the lies didn't sting. It was time for the truth to be heard, loud and clear. He wasn't just ending a marriage today. He was ending Diana's reign of power. "It's time," he said, his voice calm and professional. Diana didn't stand a chance. Ryan had been Troy's ally for years, a steady presence in the background of Troy's career and personal life. He was one of the few people who knew the full extent of what had been happening behind closed doors. She might have had the money, the connections, and the influence, but Troy had something she never expected: patience. "Once we send this out, there's no going back. It'll be in the courts, in the media, all over the place." The number on his screen was unfamiliar, but it was the one he'd been waiting for. He answered with a steady voice. The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, definitely from someone connected to Diana's side. He knew that the real battle wasn't about throwing punches. It was about waiting for the right moment to strike, and that moment had arrived. "I'm representing Diana Blackstone, and we need to discuss what you plan to do with all this information. Your moves with the IRS, the bank records, and the court documents. It's all here. We've got them cornered. I don't plan on doing anything," he said, his voice laced with an unsettling calm. "But Diana does need to understand that she's not in control anymore. How do you think Diana's family will feel when all of this comes out? What will the public think of her when they find out the truth about her actions? I'm simply making sure that the truth is heard. Diana's world is built on secrets, but secrets don't last forever. It's time for her to face the music." He had seen the cracks in their marriage long before Diana had made her final move. The signs had been there for years. "We're not just taking her down," he said slowly, a hard edge to his voice. "This is your last chance to make things right. We have resources too. We'll fight you every step of the way. If you don't back down, we'll make sure this becomes a very public affair. We're taking down everything she built on lies. This is about more than money. It's about making sure she never does this to anyone again." The lies, the secrets, the way Diana had slowly distanced herself from him. At first, it was small things: a missed dinner here, a late night there, and Troy Blackstone. Wasn't he going to stop until everything she had worked so hard to destroy had crumbled under the weight of her own lies? But as time went on, the lies grew bolder, the secrets more elaborate, and Troy had let it slide, hoping it was just a phase, hoping it would fix itself. He sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. The weight of what had just transpired was beginning to settle in. The more Diana had tried to manipulate the system, the more Troy had been uncovering. Every single transaction, every shady business deal, every misstep she had taken had been logged, tracked, and documented. Diana thought she had buried her tracks well, but Troy had an eye for detail, and he knew how to get what he needed. Diana's face had been a picture of shock and disbelief, but Troy knew her better than anyone. Beneath the surface, she was calculating her next move. She always did, and she always thought she had the upper hand. But today, she had underestimated him. As he drove through the city streets, Troy's mind raced. But now, it was clear. Diana had been planning this for a long time. She hadn't just been seeking a divorce. No, she had been plotting to take everything from him. His children, his assets, his reputation, all of it was on the line. And as he sat there in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel, he knew there was only one thing left to do. He had already begun the process of securing the legal documents. The divorce papers were just the beginning. As he pulled up to the small office building where his lawyer, Ryan Phelps, had his office, Troy couldn't help but feel a sense of finality wash over him. Ryan greeted him at the door with a firm handshake and a knowing look. He wasn't nervous. He had the evidence. He had the leverage. Troy sat down at the desk, the weight of the case settling on his shoulders. "We've got everything we need," Ryan said. Placing a stack of documents in front of him, Troy nodded, his eyes scanning the papers. Ryan raised an eyebrow, impressed by Troy's resolve. "You sure you're ready for this? I've been living in the shadows long enough. It's time to step into the light." Troy stood up, his gaze unwavering. With a final nod, Ryan picked up the phone and began making the necessary calls. The first step was about to be taken. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered outside his window, Troy received a call that he had been expecting. "Troy Blackstone." "Yes, this is Troy," he replied calmly. "How can I help you?" "We need to talk about the documents you sent," the voice continued, cold and businesslike. Troy leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. The lawyer on the other end fell silent for a moment, then spoke, the tension in his voice barely concealed. Troy's lips curled into a faint smile. "You'll make it public, that's the plan?" The lawyer's voice faltered slightly. "You can't threaten us." Troy's smile widened. "I'm not threatening anyone." He hung up the phone, feeling a rush of satisfaction course through his veins. He was ready. This was the beginning of the end for Diana. Troy leaned forward, his hands clasped together, the weight of his next move settling on him like a heavy fog. He had built this moment for months, each step deliberate and calculated. Diana, Blake, and even her powerful family might have thought they were untouchable, but they didn't understand the quiet resolve that had been forming in him for years. This isn't just about the divorce. You're going to hit them where it hurts most, in their pockets, in their reputation, and in their pride. Ryan slid the final documents across the table. The evidence Troy had meticulously gathered, laid out before him. He looked at the papers, not with excitement, but with the calm satisfaction of a man who had just completed the hardest part of a long journey. His marriage, his family, and his future, all of it had led him to this moment. "We're ready," Ryan said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the task ahead. "The press release, the court filings, and the calls to the media are all ready. We'll hit them hard and fast. Diana won't know what hit her." Troy didn't waste time. He wasn't going to let her drag this out any longer. The house that had once been a symbol of everything he had worked for now felt like a ghost of his past life. The walk up to the door felt like an eternity, but his steps were steady, each one reaffirming his commitment to what he was about to do. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Connor and Madison. It was about making sure they grew up knowing the truth about their mother, knowing who she really was. He looked at the front door, the one that Diana had walked through countless times, the one where they had shared so many memories. He rang the doorbell, and moments later, Diana appeared, her face a mask of surprise when she saw him standing there. "You've underestimated me, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." The one that would expose the truth about the lies she had been living. It no longer held any warmth for him. Her eyes scanned the contents, and Troy saw the color drain from her face. He knew that the truth, the real truth, was now out in the open. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. He was done being the victim. done being the one who had to sit in silence while Diana and her family played their games. But he didn't stop. He didn't look back. Troy Blackstone had learned long ago that the only way to protect what mattered was to take control. And that's exactly what he was doing now. "You can't do this. You'll regret it." Finally, Diana spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you everything's already been taken care of. You don't have a say in this anymore." The gloves were coming off, and it was time to take the fight to them. He pulled it out, seeing that it was a text from Diana. He hadn't heard from her in days, and yet here she was, reaching out again. "I think you know exactly why I'm here." His thumb hovered over the message, but he didn't open it immediately. Instead, he locked the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "I know this isn't easy, but you're not just protecting yourself anymore. You're protecting your kids. Diana and her family might have underestimated you, but you've got all the leverage now." Troy nodded, his eyes scanning the documents in front of him. It was late afternoon. The golden hour casting long shadows across the city streets. He thought of his children, Connor and Madison, playing in the yard earlier that day. They deserved better than this mess. And Diana, she might have been the love of his life once, but now she was just a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he was about to reclaim. "I never wanted to destroy her," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I just want justice. What she's done to me, to my children, that's something I can't let slide." Ryan leaned back in his chair, regarding Troy with an expression of respect. Troy stood up, walking over to the window of the office and looking out at the city below. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his reverie. "Everything set?" Troy asked Ryan, his voice calm but purposeful. "Everything," Ryan confirmed, standing up from his desk and walking over to the printer. Troy's lips curled into a slight smile. "Good. Let's do it." They moved quickly from the office, the sense of urgency hanging in the air. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Troy sat in his car outside the brownstone. Troy took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. As he reached the front door, his heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained calm, his posture rigid with determination. "Troy," she said, a hint of confusion in her voice. "What are you doing here?" He looked her straight in the eye. Diana's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Troy stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. "You don't get to dictate this anymore, Diana." He handed her the envelope, the one that contained the documents that would destroy her case in court. Diana took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of everything hanging between them. Troy shook his head. "I already have, but not for the reasons you think." He turned and walked away, the sound of Diana's voice calling his name trailing behind him. Troy sat at the edge of his bed, the weight of what had just transpired crashing over him like a tidal wave. His hand still gripped the door handle, a sense of finality sweeping over him as he left the brownstone for the last time. For all the years of hard work, the dreams they had built together, the family they had raised, none of it seemed to matter anymore. He had been calm when he handed it to Diana's lawyer, Lawrence Kemper, but inside, his heart had been a drumbeat of vengeance. The papers contained more than just divorce documents. They contained a wrecking ball aimed at everything Diana held dear: her reputation, her family's legacy, and the very foundation she had built her life on. He had done everything to protect them, but in the end, Diana had chosen her greed and betrayal over her family. The hustle and bustle of New York always had a way of distracting him, but today, his mind was sharp and focused. His thoughts were with the media storm that was about to unfold. Troy had carefully orchestrated every piece of this puzzle, every document, every conversation, every angle. Diana, Blake, and her family had no idea what was coming for them. His children, Connor and Madison, were the only thing that kept him anchored in this storm of emotions. Diana's family is already scrambling. "We'll hit them hard once the story breaks. I know people in high places, and you've just made yourself a target." Lawyers and power-hungry families always threatened when they were backed into a corner. The difference was that Troy wasn't intimidated. He had dealt with worse in his past. She had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of their marriage, the one who made the decisions. But now, the roles had reversed. Diana sat in her lawyer's office, staring at the screen in front of her. The news had broken. The public had learned of the Harrison family's dirty dealings, the illegal activities that had been buried for years. Your family's empire is crumbling, and you've got no one left to blame but yourself. I'm done playing games. And her face was plastered across every media outlet, right alongside the criminal conspiracy. Blake was gone, her family was under investigation, and her life was falling apart. She had underestimated Troy, thinking he was just a man who had always been a step behind her. Diana had played her cards, and now it was time for Troy to play his final move. All he had to do now was watch the game unfold. The pieces were in place, but now he had control, and she had nothing. His foster care upbringing had taught him how to survive, how to keep his head above water when everyone else around him was drowning. It was a slow-motion disaster, and Diana had no one to blame but herself. He had made sure of that. This wasn't the time for speeches or interviews. This was the time for action. Troy's phone rang off the hook with calls from reporters, each one asking for a statement. He didn't respond to any of them. This was just another game, another round of the battle. And in this game, he knew how to win. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. There was still work to be done, still more people to expose, and still more lies to unravel. But as he watched the chaos unfold around him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The encrypted files were now in the hands of the right people, those who could expose the Harrison family for what they were: corrupt, entitled, and unrepentant. He had no intention of ruining Diana's life, at least, not in the way she might have expected. What he wanted was control, justice, and to make sure that her selfishness didn't dictate his future or his children's. His next step was a quiet one, but it would have a lasting impact. If the world wanted to call it revenge, so be it. He wasn't in the business of forgiveness. He needed to keep moving forward. Diana had no idea what was waiting for her once the media got hold of the story. He was in the business of getting what was rightfully his, starting with the truth. They were too young to understand the complexities of adult betrayal, too innocent to bear the brunt of their mother's actions. But they would learn the truth. They had to. Troy couldn't live with himself if he allowed them to be swayed by the lies Diana had crafted over the years. The next steps had to be clear, and there was no room for hesitation. He would fight for them, and he would do it quietly, meticulously, like everything he had done before. His family's future was at stake. Troy's thoughts drifted to the envelope that had caused such a stir. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. It was a message from Ryan, his most trusted ally in all of this. "Ryan, it's all set. I've submitted the documents to the press. The media will get their first taste tomorrow morning." Troy stared at the text, the weight of his decision settling deeper into his chest. The next day, as the sun began to rise, Troy stood on the balcony of his temporary apartment, watching the city come to life. You can't threaten what's already been exposed. You should have stayed out of it. Troy's phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. It was Diana's lawyer, Kemper. "Kemper, you've made a huge mistake. Blackstone. You'll regret this." Troy smirked, unfazed by the threats. He had expected this. "Troy, is that so, Kemper?" Troy hit send, then set his phone down on the counter. He picked up the glass of water from the table and took a sip, steadying himself for the days to come. No one would be able to ignore the truth. She picked it up, her hands trembling as she read the text. It was from Troy. By afternoon, the media frenzy had already started. Troy pulled up the documents he had saved on his laptop, the evidence of Diana's infidelity, her manipulation, the plans she and Blake had carefully constructed to ruin him. At the same time, Diana's world was slowly collapsing around her. Blake had already started distancing himself, and her mother, Patricia, was locked in a room with federal agents, trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. Diana's phone buzzed again. "Troy, I hope you're enjoying your new reality, Diana. The truth doesn't stay hidden forever." The words stung, but Diana didn't know how to fight back. She had no leverage left. Troy sat back in his chair, looking at the headlines on his laptop. He had fought for his children, fought for the truth, and fought for his future. Troy had always been a methodical man, a strategist, every move, every word, every action calculated. And as the weeks passed since the divorce papers were signed, he had one thought in mind: the final move. Troy knew that to take them down, he needed to hit them where it would hurt the most at their core. And for that, the right people had to be in place. The right information had to be uncovered. He had made calls, sent messages, and quietly connected the dots. All of it was leading to this moment, the final nail in the coffin. He wasn't interested in petty revenge or making Diana suffer. He was far beyond that. What he wanted, what he needed, was to ensure that her family, the Harrison empire, would crumble, and with it, every ounce of control she had once believed she wielded. The plan had taken shape slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Troy had been careful to leak just enough to stir the pot, but not enough to overwhelm the authorities. He knew exactly how to play this game, a little here, a little there, and soon, the cracks would start showing. The more he dug, the more he realized how deep the corruption ran. And that's when he found it, the final piece of the puzzle. Troy sat at his desk, staring out the window. Troy had been going through old files, looking for anything that could tie Diana's father, Gregory Harrison, to the shady dealings that had gone unnoticed for years. But what made it worse was the date on the contract. Robert was a sharp man, a veteran in the field of high-stakes legal battles. He knew exactly what Troy was trying to do, and he knew how dangerous it was. But Robert also knew that Troy had something Diana didn't have: patience. She agreed reluctantly, no doubt thinking this was another chance to try and manipulate him into giving up. But Troy had no intention of giving up. Not now. It was signed shortly after Diana's parents had received a substantial donation from a business partner with questionable ties. "I can't believe she's been this sloppy. People like Diana don't understand the consequences of their actions until it is too late." The contract, the bank, records, the emails, the photos, everything. She had thought she was untouchable, that she could destroy him without consequences. But Troy had one thing she didn't: time. "You've lost. Everything you've built is falling apart." Inside was an old contract, one that had been sealed away for years. And it all led back to Blake. Diana's lover had been using his position in her life to further his own agenda, and now Troy had the proof. He pulled out a file labeled Harrison Investments. It was a document that could bury Gregory Harrison and his entire hotel empire. They contained everything: proof of her illegal activities, her financial fraud, and her affair with Blake. And this time, there would be no way out. But more importantly, it contained her father's involvement in the whole scheme. The Harrison empire was about to crumble, and Troy was the one who would watch it all unfold. The office was quiet, the usual hum of the city outside softened by the walls. His mind, though, was anything but quiet. He picked up the phone and dialed. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Is it ready?" Troy asked. Double quotes, "Yes. Everything's set. We'll move forward today," the voice replied, confident. "Good. Make sure it's done quietly. The press doesn't need to know yet, but they will when the time comes." He hung up, letting out a deep breath. The place was quiet, intimate, perfect for the conversation they were about to have. Diana sat across from him, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a subtle nervousness. The Harrison family's financial records had been analyzed, loopholes uncovered, and transactions flagged. It wasn't just about the money, it was about power. And Troy knew that if he could expose the illegalities that had propped up their empire for years, the house of cards would collapse. The media had begun to pick up the story: anonymous sources, whispers of corruption, and unethical dealings surrounding the Harrison family. Diana would be left with nothing, and so would Blake. He knew there was more. He had learned too much during his investigation. The first part of his plan was in motion. Now, all he had to do was wait. That evening, the first domino began to fall. At the same time, his associates had been hard at work, but Troy wasn't done. Not yet. It was a late Thursday night when the last piece fell into place. The contract detailed a deal between Gregory Harrison's company and a shell company, a company that had been used to launder money from various illegal activities. The next morning, Troy met with his lawyer, Robert King, to go over the final details of his plan. "We're close," Robert said, reviewing the documents. Troy smirked. That afternoon, the final confrontation took place. Troy had called Diana and asked to meet. They met at the same upscale restaurant where Troy had confronted her earlier in their marriage. "Where's Blake?" Troy asked, his tone steady. Diana's eyes flickered, but she quickly regained her composure. "He's busy." "Busy," Troy echoed. "Busy with what?" "Planning your next move." Diana shifted in her seat, but Troy didn't give her a chance to respond. "I have everything," he continued, his voice low. Diana froze. Her face paled, and Troy could see the panic creeping into her eyes. "I'm done playing your game, Diana," Troy said. Diana opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at him, defeated. Troy slid the envelope across the table. Inside were the documents that would dismantle her life. "Sign it," Troy said quietly, "and I'll walk away." Diana stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. She knew it was over. Troy could feel the air shifting around him as the story began to break. Media outlets across New York started picking up on the Harrison family's deep-seated secrets, and within hours, the story had spread like wildfire. Now that time had arrived, the Harrison empire was under siege, and Troy Blackstone was watching it all unfold like a chess master playing his final move. The headline read, "Scandalous connections and corruption surround prestigious Harrison family federal investigation. Underway, federal investigators are already at Harrison hotels. It's going to get ugly." Robert was a seasoned attorney who had been with him through thick and thin. "She's trying to play the victim. Blake's trying to flee the country. But we've got him cornered. The question is, what's your next move?" Troy had called him in during the initial stages of his plan, knowing that Robert's expertise was the key to making everything airtight. The call was brief but to the point. Diana, once the love of his life, now seemed like nothing more than a distant memory. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, they no longer held any power over him. He had already won. Troy watched from his office, his face calm, even though inside, a sense of vindication was growing. She sat down across from Troy, a forced smile playing on her lips. Blake's hidden assets, the ones Troy had secured from him, were now being siphoned off and transferred back to the rightful owners, the victims of Blake's deceit. Troy knew that Blake wouldn't be able to escape this time, not with the weight of his own crimes hanging over him. They had tracked every move, every conversation, and now the walls were closing in. There would be no escape for either of them. "You didn't just ruin your life, Diana. You ruined our family's life. You've been stealing from your own family, from your clients, from me. You've been living in a fantasy, Diana. But the truth is, it's over. Everything you've built is gone, and you'll never be able to fix it. It's over, Diana. You can run, you can hide, but there's no escape. Your empire is gone, and your reputation is ruined. You've lost everything, and you have no one to blame but yourself. You used everything we built together as a tool for your own selfish gain. You never once thought about the consequences." Diana had agreed to meet Troy at the law firm's office, likely under the assumption that she could still negotiate her way out of the mess she had made. "I'm not the one who lost. You are." Troy had no intention of negotiating. He was done with her lies, her manipulation, and her coldness. But he didn't look back. He had already won. There was no victory dance, no moment of triumph, just a cold satisfaction that came from knowing he had taken control of his life again. She would learn the full extent of his resolve today. Diana is too deep in this to walk away without consequences. Now it's time to make sure Blake goes down with her. She's already lost. "You thought you could destroy everything I've worked for. You think I'm just going to sit here and let you ruin my life?" He had always been patient, waiting for the right moment to strike, biding his time until everything lined up perfectly. Later that afternoon, Troy received a call from Robert King, his lawyer. "Everything's in motion," Robert said. "The media is all over the story. Everything you've built is crumbling. Blake's gone. Your family's empire is falling apart, and the only thing left for you is regret." Troy nodded, a grim smile on his lips. "Let it get ugly. They've made their bed. Now they get to lie in it." "Diana's not taking it well," Robert continued. Troy stood up, pacing slowly round his office. His mind was already several steps ahead. "We keep the pressure on. We hit them from every angle." The two of them had worked together to secure evidence of Diana and Blake's illegal activities. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. News outlets continued to report on the Harrison family's involvement in corrupt dealings. and federal investigators made moves to freeze their assets. Blake, once so confident and untouchable, was now on the run. Diana, too, was beginning to crumble under the pressure. Her full weight of wealth and influence was falling apart. Troy watched with cold detachment as everything he had worked for the evidence. The strategy paid off. The final blow came when Troy's old friend, Anton, the forensic analyst, sent over the final report. The day of the final meeting arrived. When Diana walked into the conference room, her face was pale and her eyes were heavy with the weight of the past few weeks. "You were never enough for me, Troy. I wanted more. I deserved more. You really thought you could win, didn't you?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You think you've won, but you haven't." Troy didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. She looked at him, eyes narrowing. As she flipped through the documents, her expression shifted. Her arrogance crumbled, replaced with disbelief. Troy's lips curled into a cold smile. "And look at you now." Diana's face turned red with fury. Troy slid a folder across the table. "You want to talk about losing? Look at what I've got here." She reached for the folder, trembling. "No," she whispered. "This can't be happening." Troy stood up, his voice firm. As Troy left the conference room, he could hear the sound of Diana's broken sobs behind him. The Harrison family's empire had crumbled, and Troy Blackstone had been the one to bring it down. Troy sat back in his chair as the final pieces of his plan fell into place. He could hear the storm brewing around him, but in that moment, he was calm, almost serene. The civil suits filed by the Moretti family, the family whose loved ones had been killed in the tragic drunk driving accident Patricia Harrison had let slide, were beginning to bear fruit. There were rumors of federal investigations, and Diana's once untouchable legacy was rapidly disappearing. Diana's having a breakdown. Her mother's under investigation. Her father's empire is collapsing, and Blake is gone. "We've got her on the ropes." Troy was ready for it. It was time to take the last step. The room was cold, the air thick with tension. Diana, sitting across from him, looked pale and broken. Her usual composure was gone, replaced with desperation. Blake's absence was a constant reminder of her failing efforts. The woman who had once controlled the room, who had been confident in her power and influence, now seemed like a shell of the person she had once been. Troy could see the walls crumbling around her. Her father was gone from the bench. The family's wealth was in ruins. "You thought you could control everything, Diana, but you didn't count on me. You didn't count on what happens when a man finally gets tired of being manipulated." And now, she was left with nothing. There would be no more fighting, no more deception. Diana had lost it all: her wealth, her power, her family. And now, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. "This isn't over, Troy. I'll fight for my children. I'll fight for my life." He had fought for them, and now they would be able to grow up with the stability they deserved. Diana had thought she could use her children as pawns, but in the end, it was Troy who had won. He had protected them from her, from the damage she had caused, and from the world she had tried to create. Diana had fought to maintain her empire, but her efforts were futile. He had started with nothing and had built an empire of his own, and in doing so, he had reclaimed what was rightfully his dignity, his family, and his future. The Harrison family's influence was crumbling. Blake was nowhere to be found, and the media had turned their attention to her family's past transgressions. Her father's hotel empire had been placed under federal oversight, and his assets were frozen. As the days passed, the pressure mounted on Diana. Connor and Madison were laughing as they ran through the grass, their joy echoing through the air. They had adapted to their new life, and though they were young, they understood one thing: Troy was there for them, and their mother was not. Troy's phone rang again. It was Robert King. "Everything's moving according to plan," Robert said, his voice low. "You made your bed. Now you can lie in it." Troy's lips curled into a slight smile. "Good. Let's finish this." But Troy wasn't done yet. There was still the matter of the final confrontation, the moment when Diana would have to face the consequences of everything she'd done. The meeting was set for the following week, at the same law firm where Troy had first handed over the envelope that had started this entire chain of events. She met his gaze, her eyes wide with fear. "You won, Troy. What more do you want? I want justice, Diana. That's all I've ever wanted." Troy leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You've built your empire on lies, manipulation, and the destruction of others. I've taken your business, your reputation, and your children. I'm not the one who destroyed your life. You did that all on your own." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. "I've already taken everything," Troy continued. Diana reached for the papers on the table, her hands shaking. Troy's eyes narrowed. "You can fight all you want, but you'll never win. Not anymore." As Diana signed the new custody agreement, the finality of the moment hit Troy. Troy stood, pushing the papers aside. "It's done," he said, his voice cold. Later that evening, Troy sat in his office, his children playing outside in the yard. Troy watched them with a mixture of pride and sadness. As he watched his children play, Troy realized that he had done more than just win a battle. He had built a life. Troy sat back in his office, staring out of the window. The autumn air outside had turned crisp, and the sound of his children laughing in the backyard filled him with a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. The number was unfamiliar, but something told him to pick it up. Connor and Madison were playing their usual game of catch, with Madison's wild throws sending Connor into fits of laughter. They didn't fully understand the weight of what had happened, but they felt the shift, the absence of Diana in their lives. They knew their father was there, and that was enough. He leaned back in his chair, listening intently as she spoke, but he couldn't help but think about how surreal this moment was. His own betrayal had hardened him, but it had also given him a new sense of purpose. Start from the beginning. As a security consultant, he was an expert in uncovering the darkest secrets of the people who thought they could hide. She spoke of his paranoia, his coldness, and the fact that he had recently hired a private investigator to follow her. He had a plan, one that would allow him to take back control of his life once again, and the Harrison family would never understand patience, strategy, and the discipline to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment had come. The stakes were high, but Troy had been in darker situations before. For Connor and Madison, he had fought and won. Their future was secure, and that was all that mattered. The world had shifted for Troy, but in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I've got the final paperwork for you to sign. The business deal with the Harrison estate is closed. The Moretti family is getting the justice they deserve. Everything's wrapped up." His work had flourished, his children were thriving, and for the first time in years, he felt like a man who had regained his footing. He had destroyed the Harrison empire, and Diana had vanished into obscurity. "I just got word from one of the investigative journalists looking into the Harrison family's connections. They've just uncovered something that's going to blow the lid off this whole thing. Turns out, Gregory Harrison wasn't just involved in business deals with some shady characters. The city had been through its own share of chaos, but now it felt like it was finally settling into a new rhythm. He was tied to a whole network of corruption that went all the way to the top. Your actions have started a chain reaction, Troy. You've brought down more than just Diana." He had no illusions about what had happened, but he had no regrets either. He had fought battles and won, and this would be no different. Just make sure they get what's coming to them. She didn't have proof yet, but Troy knew from experience that this was only the beginning. He had done it for his children, for their future, and for the life he had once dreamed of. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The storm had passed, and in its wake, Troy had emerged stronger than ever before. He thought of Diana, of the family he had built and lost, and of the destruction she had caused. He had already rebuilt his life once. Now, he would do it again. The difference this time was that he would be in control, not her. His reputation had been built on it. But now, it wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Here he was, just days after winning the battle of his own life, now being thrust back into the world of deceit and danger. It always had been. The phone on his desk buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. This time, it was a number he recognized as attorney. "Rob Kinley, Blackstone Security." He answered, his voice steady, measured. "Mr. Blackstone, my name is Amanda Richardson. I think my husband is planning to have me killed." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Amanda's voice was shaky, her words blending together in fear and desperation. She explained how her husband, a successful businessman in the tech industry, had become increasingly erratic, making threats about her safety. There were financial issues, personal grudges, and a web of lies that she had uncovered. It was clear that her world was falling apart, much like Troy's had, but her story felt different. There was no love lost between Amanda and her husband, but the stakes were just as high. Troy had no hesitation. He had been through worse, and he knew exactly how to handle the situation. "Tell me everything," Troy said, his voice unwavering. Amanda hesitated, but then she began, recounting everything she knew about her husband's business dealings, the people he was involved with, and the steps he had taken to cover his tracks. He listened carefully, his mind already working, calculating the next steps. As the call ended, Troy stood up, walked to his office window, and gazed out at the city beyond. Troy Blackstone had always thrived in the shadows, but now he had something that Diana. 3 months had passed since the final confrontation with Diana and her family. He had done what he needed to do, not just for himself, but for his children. Troy's phone rang again, pulling him from his thoughts. "Hey, Troy," Rob's voice was steady but urgent. Troy took a deep breath. "Good. Make sure it's all done clean. No press, no fanfare. Just finality. I'll make sure it's handled," Rob said. "And there's one more thing." Troy's curiosity piqued. "What's that?" "I think you'll want to know this," Rob continued. Troy felt a wave of satisfaction. It was over. Finally, he had taken back control. "I don't need the details," Troy said, his voice calm. As he hung up the phone, Troy looked out the window again. Troy had rebuilt his life, but not just for himself. The Harrison family was finished, and Diana, the woman who had once tried to destroy him, was nothing more than a distant memory. Troy Blackstone had become a man who thrived on justice, on retribution, and on taking back what was rightfully his.